Diddy had always been a loner and a hustler. In the early days, he stood on the outside looking in, watching the big producers and music moguls live the life he craved. The city was a cold place for a kid like him, but Diddy wasn't just any kid. He learned early that survival meant doing whatever was necessary. It was Marvin, a big-time producer, who gave him his first break, though even that came with strings attached. Marvin was a name in the industry, feared and revered, but always looking for someone to run his errands, handle his problems, make his life easier. Diddy didn't mind being that person. Favors and tasks were his way into the room. He never asked too many questions, just did what was needed, soaking in everything like a sponge. As far as Diddy was concerned, he was on his way. Months passed, and Diddy's list of favors grew longer, but so did his access to bigger circles. He started mingling with artists, models, and executives. He could feel himself getting closer to his dream. Until one night, everything changed. The news came in a cold text message: Marvin's dead. Shot outside his club. Diddy stared at his phone. It didn't feel real. Marvin had been untouchable, or so it seemed. But in the world Diddy was moving in, no one was truly safe. And now, Marvin's empire was up for grabs. Without hesitation, Diddy saw his opening. He started calling people, reminding them of the favors they owed him, positioning himself to step into Marvin's shoes. By the time the dust settled, Diddy wasn't just another guy in the room, he was the one running the show. It didn't take long before Diddy's name was on the lips of every up-and-coming artist in the city. His rise to power was fast, fueled by the connections he had made in the shadows. But there was something else driving him, something darker. It wasn't just the hunger for success, it was the loneliness that came with it. Diddy's rise had been built on deals, favors, and power moves, but none of it had filled the emptiness inside him. To distract himself, Diddy started throwing parties. At first, it was a celebration of his newfound status, a way to flaunt his success and bring together all the faces that had been a part of his journey. Diddy saw his isolation as a product of his harsh survival environment. Determined to change, he started hosting extravagant parties, hoping to bring together people from all walks of life. These parties are meant to bridge the gap between himself and the world he once felt alienated from. However, as Diddy dives deeper into these hedonistic gatherings, his dark side begins to surface. The parties became legendary, each one more extravagant than the last. Celebrities, models, and influencers filled his mansion, dancing to the beat of his music, sipping champagne, and living in the moment. But the parties weren't just about celebration anymore. For Diddy, they became an escape from the isolation he felt. Surrounded by people, he was still alone. It was at one of these parties that he met Sharon, a stunning woman with a sharp tongue and a playful smile. She was different from the others, or so Diddy wanted to believe. She flirted with him, teasing him about his newfound power. "Heard you're the new king in town," Sharon said with a sly grin. "Got room for another?" "There's always room," Diddy replied, trying to play it cool. "But only for the right people." The attraction was immediate, but something about it felt hollow. Diddy knew that she, like everyone else, was drawn to his power, not to him. But he let it slide. After all, this was the life he had wanted, wasn't it? To be the one at the center, to have people looking up to him, needing him. As the parties continued, Diddy began to indulge more and more in the darker side of his desires. The younger the guests got, the more he found himself watching, detached yet captivated. He wasn't just throwing parties anymore, he was orchestrating scenes, living vicariously through the decadence of others. Voyeurism crept into his life, and with it, a growing sense of unease. The lines between power and exploitation began to blur. One night, after another over-the-top party, Diddy sat alone in his sprawling penthouse, staring at the city lights outside his window. The silence of the room pressed in on him, heavier than ever. His phone buzzed with messages from people still trying to ride the high of the party, but he ignored them. He was beginning to see the truth of his situation: all the money, the power, the parties, it was never going to be enough. Diddy pulled out an old photo of himself, a time before Marvin, before the rise, when he was just a kid trying to make it. In the photo, he was smiling, full of hope. Now, that kid seemed like a stranger. He had built an empire, but it was an empire of emptiness, founded on exploitation, lies, and a hunger that could never be satisfied. "What happened to you, man?" he whispered to the image of his younger self. The darkness inside him was no longer something he could run from. He had climbed to the top, but the price had been his soul. The parties, the fame, the women, it was all meaningless now. And as Diddy sat there, alone in his penthouse, he realized that he had lost everything that truly mattered. The boy who had once dreamed of making a difference was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a man. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, casting a golden light on the skyscrapers below. For the first time in years, Diddy didn't feel the thrill of a new day. He felt nothing at all. He glanced again at the photo of his younger self before turning his attention to an old folder tucked in his drawer. Inside it was an old contract with a name at the bottom: Marvin. He remembered the day he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The truth was, he hadn't just stumbled into power when Marvin was murdered, he had orchestrated it. Diddy had paid a hitman to take Marvin out, ensuring he could fill the power vacuum. He hadn't wanted anyone to know, so after Marvin was gone, he'd taken care of the hitman too. One less loose end. One more step toward the throne. But now, looking back, Diddy realized that every step forward had been a step further from the man he used to be. He had everything, but in losing Marvin, he'd lost himself too.